I've been thinking about that '70s oil event. It's different than our other supply shock analyses. So I thought I should just talk through that quickly. So I've got uh, my hand drawn equivalent version or sort of equivalent version to the oil market analysis in the textbook. Notice that there's this uh, long flat spot in that supply curve, and this corresponds to the fact that OPEC member nations have a much lower cost of getting oil to market than do other suppliers, non-OPEC countries. We just assume it's constant and horizontal, and anyway, that's the OPEC supply, and then there's this non-OPEC oil production that has an upward sloping marginal cost and thus an upward sloping world oil supply. And OPEC could produce a lot more at that lower cost, but they get together and decide to restrict output so that price jacks up. And what I've got over on the right hand side is a non-OPEC producer. So a producer in the North Sea or in Texas or somewhere. And there we have this initial long run equilibrium. So the reason this supply event looks so different than other ones that we've studied where variable costs rise, say, is that this '70s oil shock came about because the OPEC producers just limited output further in response in a punishment to the United States and other European nations for backing Israel in I think it was the 7 Days War. Might have been the Yom Kippur War. There were a lot of little wars happening back then between Israel and the Arab states banded together to fight Israel. Anyway, so the U.S. supports Israel. The punishment was decided on by OPEC. They're going to restrict supply still further. World supply went down because that OPEC event. Prices went up. World oil consumption and sales went down. Now, the key is to realize that the typical non-OPEC producer didn't have some structural change in its costs. It's just that OPEC actions meant much higher revenues from selling oil. So we see that output would go up for a non-OPEC producer, and they'd go from zero profits to making much more money by selling oil. That's the short run event. And then from there on, it's still a little bit different. As far as the supply goes, these profits to non-OPEC producers are going to inspire aggressive exploration elsewhere in the world, and that's exactly what happens. And as that exploration is successful, the non-OPEC supply is going to shift back to the right. Maybe not by the full amount that OPEC cut it off, but those supplies are going to be found elsewhere, albeit at a higher cost. But those supplies exist. And the same story goes for demand too. The high prices of the '70s motivated a lot more aggressive conservation efforts. So over time, the short-run demand for oil shifted to the left as people drove more fuel-efficient cars and converted their house furnaces from oil-burning furnaces to natural gas-burning furnaces, etc. Over the long run, there's a lot of things one can do to conserve energy. So I've drawn it here so that price ended up returning to its initial equilibrium level. Might have stayed a little bit higher, given that the new stocks coming online were more expensive than the old stocks. But anyway, you get the idea of both long run supply adjustment and long run demand adjustment.